This documentary gives us some insight into this complex web of stevia biopiracy and Indigenous communities' lost access to cultural resources. If you continued watching this video, you would see the case of rooibos tea biopiracy as well, and the financial exclusion of Indigenous communities. Biopiracy is sometimes called scientific colonialism, which is a useful term to keep in mind for DRR. There has been some global progress on this front. The UN Convention on Biological Diversity led to the adoption of the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing in 2014. This agreement is intended to ensure compensation of Indigenous peoples whose biological resources are taken for commercial use. Note, though, that this agreement came into effect in 2014, and the documentary was released in 2022. There continue to be large loopholes in agreements like this, which tend to favor wealthier nations and multinational corporations. In 2024, the World Intellectual Property Organization facilitated the signing of the Treaty on Intellectual Property, Genetic Resources, and Associated Traditional Knowledges. And each year, May 22nd is the International Day for Biological Diversity. So work is in progress, but there is much more to be done. Despite concerns such as biopiracy, disaster risk reduction requires both modern science and Indigenous knowledges. This was acknowledged in 2015 when the Sendai Framework came into effect. This is the main multilateral agreement to reduce disaster risk around the world. I'll give you a moment to read Section 24. Are any words jumping out to you from this section? The word complement is notable here. Dr. Simon Lambert is a Maori researcher from Aotearoa, New Zealand, and a member of the Tūhoe and Ngati Rupani tribes. Dr. Lambert asks, what does the word complement mean here exactly? Lambert explains that collaboration with other knowledges is widely accepted by practitioners, knowledge keepers, and elders. Indigenous knowledges and modern science can work together, but Lambert has some questions. He asks, are settlers just clipping fragments of Indigenous knowledges onto other knowledges to create some imagined better world? Will this knowledge even be used to benefit the people among whom it originated? Or will it become the victim of a long tradition of biopiracy that replicates older inequalities? Will Indigenous knowledges be taken so out of context and twisted by bureaucratic environmental management that it becomes meaningless? Lambert is clear that Indigenous peoples need to be in control of how their knowledge is used for disaster risk reduction. They must benefit from and own their information and data. Dr. Lambert flips the script and asks, how can Indigenous peoples incorporate Western science into their worldviews to protect their communities? Lambert's doing at least three things here. He's positioning Indigenous peoples as the actors who have the right to manage their environments. Second, he's placing Indigenous knowledges as the default that Western science can be integrated into. And third, he's highlighting that these knowledge collaborations must be used in the interests of Indigenous communities. As you read disaster studies texts, you might think about whether and how these three elements are present. To end today's lecture, I'm going to take us back to where we started with the Cascadia subduction zone. And I'm going to offer two examples of Indigenous and settler collaboration to reduce earthquake risk. Our first example is through Indigenous elders sharing their earthquake knowledge by combining traditional storytelling with modern technologies. For example, Ho tribe elder Viola Reeb recorded a YouTube video of her telling the story Run to High Ground. The sharing of this story helps Indigenous and settler children respond to Cascadia earthquakes and the tsunamis they trigger. The Ho tribe worked with the Provincial Emergency Program of BC and the Emergency Management Division of the Washington State Military Department to create this video. For as long as anyone can remember, the Ho people lived near the mouth of the Ho River, where it flows into the Pacific Ocean. Their traditional territory also included their movement patterns inland into the coast range of the Olympic Mountains and by canoe in the Pacific Ocean north into Canada and south into Quinault. The 1856 Quinault Treaty reduced their land base to just 1 square mile, bordered by the Ho River and the Pacific Ocean. The Ho River floods annually and causes damage to Ho housing and infrastructure. But the reservation boundaries make traditional mobility patterns difficult. They had no higher land to go to. Ho leadership worked for years to try to expand their reservation territory to include higher ground. A full description of this work and the numerous collaborations it involved is available here on the Ho tribe website. Finally, in 2010, President Obama signed the Ho Indian Tribe Safe Homelands Act. This act ensures the Ho Reserve includes land that will not flood. Here we see an example of a collaboration that forwards Indigenous resources and expands the capacity of Indigenous peoples to protect their communities. Let's go over what we talked about today. Coastal First Nations have developed seismic knowledge of Cascadia for centuries, and they have passed down this knowledge intergenerationally. It includes information about the connection between earthquakes and tsunamis and how to respond to minimize harm. Earthquake stories serve as memorable learning tools or heuristics connected to physical processes. They also contain lessons about morality, relationships, and reciprocity between humans and between non-human peoples and entities like water and land. The Enlightenment and its influence on conceptualizations of credible knowledge helped delegitimize non-Western and Indigenous knowledge systems. Yet, modern scientific understandings of the world are shaped by social, cultural, and political contexts. Science is a social institution. We must carefully consider how modern science and Indigenous knowledge systems can work together and who can gain from this collaboration. Indigenous knowledges are crucial to DRR, with Indigenous communities in charge of how and for what purpose their knowledge is involved.